France's President Emmanuel Macron is in Beijing for a three-day visit to China, where he's met with President Xi Jinping. The French president is aiming to attract more investment from Chinese companies and increase market access for European firms. Equally, Russia's war in Ukraine will be a major talking point. It is believed that Macron will try to convince Xi to use his influence with Russia's Vladimir Putin to bring about a ceasefire. And let's listen in to some of what the Chinese leader said to his guest.
Today, the world is seeing the most profound and fast changes in a century, and humanity again stands at a crossroads. China and France should demonstrate their sense of responsibility, uphold the banner of multilateralism, see through the fog of uncertainty, and firmly stand on the right side of history. China is ready to work with France, always bearing in mind the fundamental interests of our peoples and those of the international community, to overcome differences, use dialogue on an equal and open footing, and ensure that the comprehensive China-France strategic partnership moves forward steadily and effectively.
And President Macron also said he wants closer ties.
Nothing is simple, and current imbalances, such as geopolitical ones, could ultimately put our countries at risk of going their separate ways. I believe we are both convinced of the importance of international cooperation, the UN framework, and effective multilateralism. That is why these visits are essential for putting all issues back on the table and building paths of convergence and cooperation through our collective will.
And let's get more from DW's East Asia correspondent Rick Glowert, who is following this visit from Taipei. Rick, good to see you. Now, Macron told Xi that China and France must also overcome their differences. He also spoke about imbalances. What is Macron referring to?
Well, the main differences that the two countries have is obviously Ukraine and also trade. When it comes to trade, both France and the EU want to address that trade imbalance with China. At the same time, they want to have less of the Chinese goods flooding the EU market, whilst China sees kind of these anti-dumping, anti-subsidy measures as unfair and has objected to them. But, Macron is in a strongish position. He has a good-ish relationship with Xi. This is his fourth visit to China. And out of all the European leaders, he is one of the ones that can, bring these difficult issues to the table.
How does China see this? I mean, is it about ties between China and France, or is it a wider relationship with the European Union that China is looking at?
Yes, well, China has been having this relationship with Macron, and they see Macron as one of the leaders in Europe that has been a bit more pragmatic about relations with China. Macron in the past has said that, Europe doesn't have to choose between China and the US. So I think that there is a understanding from Xi that out of all the people in Europe that he can talk to Macron, and that Macron is less likely to kind of just follow what the US says, to just toe the US line and use Washington's position on some of these issues.
What exactly is the kind of relationship that China wants with the European Union?
I think that China wants to have a strong trade relationship with Europe. It wants to be based on, reciprocality, on strong ties, but also that, that it's not subject to these investigations, these measures into anti-dumping and anti-subsidies, that they can trade as equals, and that there's trust built on those areas, and that the two sides can come together on the hot geopolitical issues, whether it's Ukraine close to Europe, or whether it's issues like Taiwan and the South China Sea closer to China, as equals, and talk frankly as global leaders.
Let's talk about Ukraine, because that apparently is also on the agenda on this visit by President Macron. Now, Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky was in Paris earlier this week to discuss the potential ceasefire terms for the war with Russia. Where does Beijing stand on that? Because here in Europe, the feeling has been that Beijing can impose on its friend in Moscow to try and stop the war. Is that something that's likely to happen?
Well, as usual, we heard China saying that Xi Jinping saying that he wanted to have peace in Ukraine, but China and Xi Jinping have never really called out Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. And many people believe that, it is China's implicit support of Russia that allows for this war to go on. There are concrete things that China could do aside from Xi Jinping talking to Vladimir Putin. China could also stop buying so much fuel from Russia. And also there's a lot of criticism that Chinese exports end up as part of the Russian war machine. And that's obviously something that Beijing denies. But this is a hard ask for Xi Jinping and China. Even over the last year or so, we've seen that relationship between Russia and China strengthen. They describe that as a limitless friendship. And even this week, the Chinese foreign minister has been in Moscow. They've been talking about how they have a broad consensus on international issues.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Rick Lauer, DW East Asia correspondent reporting from Taipei. Thanks so much.